Hi everyone, thanks for joining the Protocol Labs Research Seminar Series. Today's speaker is Dr. Sreeram Kannan. Dr. Kannan is currently an assistant professor at the University of Washington in Seattle. From 2012 to 2014, he was a postdoctoral scholar at UC Berkeley, before which he received his PhD in electrical engineering and his MS in mathematics from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, where he won the 2013 Van Valkenburg Outstanding Dissertation Award. He is a recipient of the 2019 University of Washington ECE Outstanding Teaching Award, the 2018 Amazon Catalyst Award, and a 2017 NSF Faculty Early Career Award, and a whole bunch of other awards that I cut out, but you are welcome to find them on his website. His research interests include the applications of information theory and learning to blockchains, computational biology, and wireless networks. He is also a co-recipient of a grant from Protocol Labs and our Resilient Networks Lab to address scalability bounds of peer-to-peer pub-sub networks. And actually his collaborator for that project, Dr. Shailesh Venkatakrishnan from Ohio State University, will give a talk on optimal peer-to-peer design for blockchains on August 27th as part of this seminar series, so come back for that. Dr. Kannan, you're up.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. Thanks to Protocol Labs for organizing this talk. So the talk is titled Unified Approach to Permissionless Protocol Security. I'll explain what I mean by that. But broadly, what we want to do is, instead of looking at permissionless protocols, each one as its own thing, is there a unified way to study how to prove security guarantees for these different classes of protocols? So that's going to be the main theme. I'll try to also touch on some of the other themes that we've been engaged in blockchain. Okay, so one of the key words in the talk is permissionless protocol security, right? And what do I mean by permissionless protocol security? In a permission network, we have n nodes, and these n nodes are decided a priori. And Bitcoin basically ushered in the alternative paradigm of permissionless networks, where there is no node which controls the permissions as to who can join the network and who cannot join the network. So any node can join the network. So that led to the paradigm of permissionless protocols, beginning with Bitcoin. There are many emerging protocols, and some of them make decisions to be more permission versus permissionless. But I want to point out that the applications of these protocols go far beyond currencies, as, for example, Filecoin is clearly an example of. The broader principle here is whenever you can cooperate without the existence of a digital intermediary. I'm not going to spend any more time on it because I don't want to sell ice to Eskimos. Okay, so the key question that we want to address here is the role of randomness in blockchains. So a key part of some of these protocols is the existence of randomness. Why do we have randomness? Randomness always plays a key role in distributed computing, and one of the main purpose in here is symmetry breaking, right? Like you have all nodes in the network and they're all symmetric, they're all equals. So you want to break the symmetry and let one node take a lead. So that's where randomness comes in. There is also one more particular reason which randomness is utilized in a protocol like Bitcoin, is it is resource dependent. And this is essentially helping you overcome or provide civil resistance, right? So there is either based on the amount of work, amount of space, amount of stake, whatever, you can break the randomness. And this is providing you civil resistance. There's also, other aspects of randomness in blockchains. For example, is the randomness public? Is it private? Is it knowable ahead of time by the others? For example, verifiable random functions. We'll touch upon some of these themes in this talk. And our goal is to kind of formulate a general purpose strategy that can be used for proving security results in blockchains across these class of protocols. Okay, so before I delve into it, I'm going to just have a quick scorecard for Bitcoin. So the one aspect that Bitcoin has been really great at is security in the wild, right? Like it has held massive amounts of monetary value and defended against all kinds of potential attacks, as long as the total adversarial power is less than 50%. But there are other aspects in which Bitcoin has not fared so well, which is what really has motivated the plethora of these other protocols that are in the fray. Energy efficiency, latency, order of hours, and throughput is very small. So these are the different dimensions on which we would like to do well, but Bitcoin is not doing well. And this has really motivated the plethora of other permissionless protocols. And we'll try to revisit some of this as we are redoing the security analysis. Okay, like Jonathan said, please feel free to stop and ask questions. I also have a whiteboard here for more detailed explanations and discussions. Okay, so I think for this audience, I don't have to go into a primer on Bitcoin, but I'm going to spend like 1 minute very quickly setting it out. So you have mining. So let me actually just say each block has a hash of the previous block. You put in some transactions, and then you have a random string nonce. You try many versions of it before you get a block. And if you satisfy the hash threshold, that's your proof of work, and then you can float your block. So this is mining in Bitcoin. And it happens in a distributed manner. All the nodes are trying to solve the puzzle, and whichever one got the block first floats it. And the longest chain is built like this. And once in a while, it'll happen that there are blocks which are mined in parallel. And then the tie is broken. Maybe, there are 2 blocks. Are you able to see my pointer? Yeah, okay. So there are 2 blocks, then, different groups may be mining on different blocks, but one of them, if they succeed first, then they're going to build a block on top and then extend the longest chain. So here, it's important to note that if you keep increasing the rate of mining of Bitcoin, now the practical mining rate is set at once every 10 minutes, but if you keep increasing it beyond, for example, if it's 1 every millisecond or whatever, then there's a very high chance that there is forking at every level, right? So, and this picture will not hold, you'll have a highly forked blockchain. So this is one of the aspects we'll try to study when we talk about sharp security analysis of Bitcoin and other protocols. Okay, so what's going on here? You have the longest chain is growing like a Poisson process. In fact, we'll go into the detailed model, but there is a longest chain protocol which says that everybody, at least honest nodes, should continue to mine on top of the longest chain. Okay, so now one of the core attacks on Bitcoin is the double spend attack. What's a double spend attack? You have a block and which has a certain transaction of value, and if somebody already confirms that they got this transaction and therefore maybe they give you your coffee or your car, now there is a possibility that you can go back and create an alternative chain which is longer than the chain in public, and potentially take over the longest chain and hence disregard that transaction. So this will be a double spend because the guy thought they got the money, but they didn't. Okay, so, and an obvious defense against such an attack is the K-deep confirmation policy. You don't accept a transaction as soon as it gets into a block. You wait for a certain number of blocks to be built on top. And why would this policy work? This policy would potentially work because when you mine blocks in private, if you do not have enough computational power to outrun the public growth of the blockchain, then, and K is large, then basically, you will never be able to catch up with the public chain. So this is the basic premise underlying the security of Bitcoin. And it's not anything new. Satoshi already did some calculations on what K should be and what is the reversal probability. Because as you can imagine, for any finite K, there is always a reversal probability. Because even though you may not have 50% adversarial power, you just got lucky and mined K blocks consecutively. But the probability of that goes down exponentially in K, and that's the table. Okay, so this is the Satoshi's original view why we can think that Bitcoin is secure against 50% adversarial power. Okay, any questions still here?
I have just one. So in this whole discussion, I guess we're assuming that the miners have like a broadcast O2O channel to each other.
That's correct.
Right, because just to verify, if you have like a sparse network across them, there is no sort of reason to claim or be able to prove that there can be other problems in addition to chain forking.
That's correct. That's correct. But okay, so I'm not going to address that aspect in this talk. We are going to assume that there is a broadcast medium, but I'm going to focus on one particular aspect, which is delta. If you send a block through this broadcast medium, it takes a delta time, not zero time, to reach everybody. So I'm going to model that aspect, but there may be other aspects. For example, when the network is sparse, you could be subject to eclipsing and other things, and I'm not addressing that here. It could be part of the discussion on how to redesign the peer-to-peer network carefully. So the high-level picture we have in mind, and I guess almost everybody does, is there is a P2P, and the P2P gives this broadcast primitive to the consensus layer. And the broadcast primitive says that as long as you send a block in, it should reach all honest nodes within delta time. And that's a layering approach that we're going to take and assume that for now. But that's a great point, that when that assumption is broken, then there are other security problems. But even under this, we will see what other things get broken. Okay, so that's the security. But really, is this security claim true? That's what I'm going to re-examine now. So this is based on our recent work where we try to do a sharp security analysis. The paper is titled somewhat in a tongue-in-cheek way. It's called "Everything is a Race and Nakamoto Always Wins." So this will appear in this year's CCS and the joint work with the collaborators listed here. Okay, so what do I mean by a full analysis? What does that mean? So Nakamoto considered, Satoshi Nakamoto in the Bitcoin original paper considered only the private attack. What is a private attack? The adversary grows a chain in private, right? These black blocks are grown by the adversary and try to outrun the public chain. So this is what Nakamoto considered, and showed that there is a 50% security threshold. But there are other attacks possible, right? For example, you could balance. So the adversary, instead of trying to say that I'm going to create a private chain which catches up with the public chain, can try to balance, between two public chains. And maybe this is the longest chain for some time, that's the longest chain for some time, and keep switching between the two. So this is called a balancing attack. It could do selfish mining, could do many other things, right? And I'll explain the full space of adversary that we're considering. But in general, the blocks mined by the honest and the adversary will not look like the A, but would look like B. What is B? In B, the colored blocks are all mined by the adversary, and the white blocks are all mined by the honest guys. And they could be staggered in some complex combination, and that's what the picture is showing. What is the complex adversarial space that I'm talking about? So let's go over it slowly. So an adversary can mine a block anywhere, right? So where to mine a block is under adversarial control. 2, it also has freedom about when to release the block. And again, this degree of freedom is important, for example, in selfish mining, right? Okay. there is a third degree of freedom, which is what content to put into the block. And finally, all of these, where to mine a block, when to release the block, and what content to include can be state dependent. It may look at the present state of the blockchain and then decide which of the attacks to execute in what proportion. Okay, and so that's the full adversarial space. And I've de-emphasized the content, because what we're going to do is something called a backbone analysis. What's a backbone analysis? A backbone analysis is a content independent analysis. It is talking about when the structure of the longest chain stabilizes. That's what we're going to try to understand. Okay, any questions on the adversary space? I guess this is the most important point of the talk right now. Okay, if there are no questions, then I'll move on. But I want to point out that this modeling actually is not our work. There's a beautiful paper by Juan Garay et al. Called the Bitcoin Backbone Protocol. And this full adversarial space modeling is already done. Okay. Let's just look at, because I said Satoshi Nakamoto already did some security analysis in the original paper. And what he really showed is Bitcoin is secure against the private attack. A private attack is you grow a chain in private and then try to outrun. But the Bitcoin Backbone Protocol, Juan Garay et al., showed that the proof of work longest chain protocol is secured against the entire space of attacks, which we defined in the last slide. Actually, I forgot to mention one additional dimension of freedom for the adversary. We'll assume that the network has latency delta, which means when a block is received by one honest node, all other honest nodes will receive that block within a delta time. This delta is fixed, but inside the delta time, when which node receives that block can also be controlled by the adversary. So that's called timing control. I should have included that here. And really what this backbone protocol shows is that it is the longest chain protocol is secure against the entire suite of attacks. And just a remark here, Satoshi's paper is beautifully written, 9 pages, easy to follow, whereas this Bitcoin Backbone Protocol, for some of you who may have seen it, is not that easy to follow and requires 46 pages. So one question you may ask yourself is really, was this necessary, or maybe it's just a waste of time? Some academics sitting and doing some calculations. So I'm going to argue that it's actually necessary to do this carefully. There is another protocol instead of the longest chain called Ghost, which not only takes the length of the chain into account, but also takes into account the weight of the subtree. I'm not going to explain what it is. It's a beautiful paper, and the paper showed that this protocol is secure against, the paper actually claimed security right in the title, right? Even when you increase the mining rate as high as you want, it is still secure against the private attack, and it's been used in Ethereum and many other projects. But actually the protocol is not secure if you increase the mining rate beyond a certain point. And that point is basically the same point till which even Bitcoin is secure. So you don't really get any advantage of using this Ghost protocol. And we have a calculation in our paper, but basically the attack looks like a balancing attack. So the adversary is trying to confuse everybody as to which is the longest chain. It doesn't do anything in private, everything's done in public. And in public, it's able to create a confusion as to which is the longest chain and maintain that confusion forever. And so that's the attack. And so that's one of my arguments for why we think the security proof against the general adversarial space is important. Any questions on this before we move on? Okay, so if not, let's go back to our scorecard. Okay, we claim that this paper, the paper by Garai et al., the Bitcoin Backbone Protocol, actually proves that it's secure, but it actually proves that it's secure only when delta is small. Okay, so when the network, actually I should say delta is only when lambda is small, which is the mining rate is small, not for all mining rate. Actually, this should be lambda, not delta. But what happens when your mining rate is large? What is the threshold till which Bitcoin is secure? This was actually open. Okay, to understand this, to set this problem up, I need a model. So I'm going to explain a model for Bitcoin. So this is going to abstract out the entirety of the all the details about the cryptographic details, and only going to obtain a purely stochastic view. So we found that even though most of the protocol analysis is really actually only a stochastic analysis, but most of the papers actually mix up the stochastic analysis along with the cryptographic aspects. So we are going to decouple it and only focus on the stochastic analysis. So actually, let me use my whiteboard here, be helpful. Any questions on what I'm talking about till now?
Just to verify, is lambda just the reverse of the typical frequency of mining one block?
That's right. That's right. Is the lambda is the blocks per second.
Okay. For the Poisson distribution?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll explain exactly what the lambda is. That's the slide. So maybe it's easier to even write it down rather than to show it in a. So what are we going to have? We're going to have honest arrivals at Poisson rate lambda h and adversarial arrivals at a Poisson process with rate lambda a. Okay, so what do I mean by that? So you have, so let's say this is the current blockchain. Okay, so honest guys, so think of it as there is some honest mining process which generates honest blocks, and honest blocks attach at the tip of a longest chain. So you're going to attach a block here. If this timer kicks in, it may happen that the adversarial timer kicks in first. So the adversary mines a block, whereas the honest block attaches only to the tip of a longest chain. An adversarial block can attach to any block of its choice. But the only control we have is that the adversary mining has a certain bound on the rate. That's the rate. That rate is called lambda a. This rate is called lambda h. Okay. Is there, so for simplicity, I'm going to just describe the case when delta equals 0. Delta is the delay. When you send a block, when does the block reach everybody, right? And so this is how the block tree is going to look. But I want to emphasize one aspect, that the adversary blocks may or may not be yet visible to the honest nodes. Okay, so the honest nodes may not know this, even though it exists. The honest nodes don't know about it, and it may be released at a later point of time, and you may only get to know about it. Okay, so that's the model. The model is that there is a mining once again, there's a mining rate lambda h at which honest blocks are being generated. They attach to the tip of the longest chain. And there is a mining rate lambda a at which adversary blocks are generated, and they attach arbitrarily to any block. And now, as you can see, there is a kind of complex coupling between the randomness and the adversarial choice. And both of them together evolve this block tree. Okay, questions?
Yeah, so my question is, does the Poisson distribution, first of all, I'm assuming we're talking about a continuous over time.
That's right, that's right. So I'm modeling everything in continuous time, so which is very different from what most people do.
Yeah, so does this distribution model the creation of the blocks or the arrival at all other nodes? Because
no. Okay, excellent. Thank you. So the arrival at all other nodes at this moment, I'm going to assume instantaneous because delta equals 0. There's no delay in sending stuff. When I say arrival, it's just when it is created. So creation times is what I'm actually talking about. And when we have a network model, when delta is non-zero, there's a network model, then there'll be a difference between the creation time and when it arrives at different nodes. But at this, so the more general thing is the rate is modulating the, so it should ideally be called honest creations and adversarial creations.
Okay, so the chain that you are using as a common place to attach them is a hypothetical chain of all existing blocks.
Yes. So we call it the mother tree.
Okay.
It's there. It's kind of in the ether. Nobody knows it, but it's there. It's kind of the underlying ground truth that nobody knows. But as far as the analysis is concerned, we can somehow use the mother tree.
Okay.
Okay. So that's the setup. Okay. So that's the setup. So we call this tree T of T, right? Like this is a tree at time T. And honest nodes may not know of this entire tree. The honest nodes may only know about a subtree of this tree. The adversary, we assume, knows everything because we want to give power to the adversary. And we have another concept called C of T. C of T is the chain or the honest chain at time T of honest nodes. So since delta equals 0, we'll assume that all honest nodes have the same view, right? Because any block that's sent, all honest nodes receive at the same time. So we'll assume that all honest nodes have the same view. But C of T is the chain, the longest chain, right? Longest chain at time T that's maintained by the honest nodes. The actual chain in T, the actual longest chain in T of T may be longer, but this is the chain that has been exposed to the honest nodes, right? So what we assume is the adversary, so T of T is evolving according to the underlying mother process, and C of T is the constraint that is placed is an adversary can force you to adopt any other chain as long as the length is equal or greater. You have a certain chain, the honest nodes have a certain chain. Now the adversary can force you to adopt any other chain inside the block tree as long as it has greater, equal or greater length. So that's the model. Is this model clear? What T of T and C of T is? Okay, so here is the a very important simplification. Really, there are two properties which are operationally important, right? Which is called safety and liveness. And that's what normally we would like to study. But instead, I'm going to study a property called convergence. Convergence is a simpler property, but in our paper, we actually sit and prove everything about safety and liveness. But here, I'm going to kind of, at a high level, just argue something about convergence. What do I mean by convergence? So you take C of T, right, as T is increasing. So at different times, you have different chains, right? So you look at the chain, evolution of the longest chain, okay? And note that it's not the longest chain in T of T, it's the longest chain in the honest node's view. And so C of t, you're just viewing as t increases, right? Now, what do we want to happen? We want, in a good blockchain, C of t to converge. Okay, what do I mean by converge? So let's say at time 0, you have block number 12, block number 20, something. I'm just having some random numbers for the blocks. This is the chain at, let's say, time t. You look at time t equals 100. You want this chain to be there, right? And in addition, some more stuff to be there. So in general, what we want is you take so we say C of t converges if all prefixes of C of t converge. Means, so you just take the chain till a certain length. Let's just look at the first 5 blocks, okay? And now you have just the length 5 prefix of the chain over time. Question, does it stabilize? Does it become the same after some point? Which means that all points in the future, the first 5 blocks remain the same. So this is persistence, right? So we want persistence in a blockchain. Somehow the method we prove also implies liveness. I'll argue this later. But at this point, this convergence is a notion for persistence. And really what we've done at this point is convert questions about blockchain security into questions about convergence of the convergence of a certain stochastic process. Is this clear? Any questions on the model? Let me just show the model here in this picture. You can forget the text. So you have this block tree, and the adversary mines blocks according to a Poisson process, and it has to pick a parent on which it can attach the block, and then it attaches the block. Right? So this is how the mother tree evolves, whereas the honest node always grows the longest chain. Okay. Okay. So I talked about the tree process and the chain, and the main question is, when does the chain converge? Okay. So our main result, maybe I'll show the main result. If under delta equals 0, there is no delay. Is as long as the honest arrival rate is greater than the adversarial arrival rate, then the chain converges. I guess this was already known from the result in the Bitcoin backbone protocol. But really, if you go back to, so our main goal was to understand similar results as a function of delta, the network latency. And here are some of the bounds. There's been a sequence of papers trying to better understand this model. And you have the original Bitcoin backbone protocol. So let me explain what I'm plotting. What we are plotting here is the security threshold. What is the security threshold? Security threshold beta is the fraction of adversary power, lambda A by lambda A plus lambda H. It's a fraction, right? Is it 50% or more? Lambda A by lambda A plus lambda H. That's the adversary fraction. Now, what is the x-axis? X-axis is take the lambda, right, which is the total arrival rate, lambda H plus lambda A, is basically the inverse of that. It's the inverse of lambda. So the arrival rate, right, is in blocks per second, right? And then you have delta is the network latency, is in seconds. So lambda delta is the correct product to look at. So here we plot 1 over lambda delta. So basically, as you increase lambda, you're going more and more left in the picture. You fix delta, right? Just for now, assume delta is being fixed. As you keep increasing lambda, you're going more and more towards the left of this picture. Right? Okay, so as you go more and more to the left, how much adversary fraction can you tolerate? That's what this picture is trying to calculate. And these different curves by these different papers, there are 4 papers whose curves have been plotted, show what they guarantee. All of these guarantee security above this point. So for example, this figure, the blue, let me go to the red figure. The red figure says that if your 1 over lambda delta equals 1, then you can handle like a 15% adversary fraction. That's what it's saying. It doesn't say that you will not be able to handle more than 15%, but it guarantees that you can definitely handle 15%. Okay, and our main result is that this is not a tight characterization. So you could, of course, also plot a curve assuming only the private attack exists, right? So the adversary can only do private attacks. Suppose that's a model. Then you will actually get the blue curve. That's the blue curve, right? It really shows that if, for example, at lambda delta equals 1, you cannot tolerate more than like 38% adversary. That's what it shows. But there was a gap between the previous work and the private attack. So the existing work showed that you will be secure beyond this point. The private attack shows that you cannot be secure beyond this point. But our main result is that the true threshold is actually given by the private attack threshold. That's our main result. Okay, is the statement of the result clear? So what it shows is really the worst attack, at least in the sense of the threshold, is given by the private attack. So this is why we named our paper Nakamoto Always Wins. And the reason is that Nakamoto only considered the private attack. And it turns out that that's all that you need to consider, but it requires a detailed proof to show that that's all that you need to consider, at least for that protocol, the longest chain protocol. It's not true in general, and we have a lot of counterexamples across a variety of proof of work, proof of stake, proof of space, where private attack is not the worst case. So, okay, so that's the main result. Is the result clear as far as the proof of work is concerned? And the result is obtained by a core idea, which we call block tree partitioning. I'll explain the idea. It's a very subtle idea. I'll just explain the idea at a high level for this talk. I welcome those who are interested to read the paper. If you have any questions, I'm happy to chat, fix the time and chat later. Okay, so here is the basic idea. Whatever the adversary did, there is a picture like this. There is a tree, and there are some honest blocks, and then there are some adversary blocks. And the colored blocks are created by the adversary. So what we've done is color the blocks based on which honest block it grew under. So for example, all the purple blocks have grown under H0. The orange block has grown under H1. The green blocks have grown under H2, and so on. Okay, so we can take the original one and then create a fictitious system, not a real system, but a theoretical system, where the honest blocks are drawn in a straight line, in a chain. There is no chain of the honest blocks, right? They're connected in some complicated way. But we call it the fictitious honest chain. So the honest blocks are placed in a straight line. And each adversary blocks, the set of adversary blocks that have grown under, that are descendants of that particular honest node, are drawn under it. Okay, and essentially, so is this decomposition clear? So you have the honest nodes. We're not claiming that the honest nodes have to form a chain, but we construct a fictitious honest chain. And then you have these trees growing under each of these honest nodes or each of these honest blocks. A bunch of adversary blocks have gotten attached to that honest block. So we draw all those trees. We call this partitioning as block tree partitioning. We partition the tree of blocks into a fictitious honest chain, which may not be a real chain, but a fictitious chain. and a set of trees growing under each of these honest chains. Okay. So here you have it. Now just drawn it in a different way. So you have each honest chain and a tree growing underneath it. And and a fictitious honest chain at the top. And we define an idea of what we call as a Nakamoto block. Again, in difference to Nakamoto. And what do we mean by Nakamoto block? It's a block which is a convergent block. What's a Nakamoto block? It's a block in which the fictitious honest chain always grows faster than all the past trees. So you can think of these trees are trying to catch up with the fictitious honest chain. They're all growing, right? And you have these many trees which are potentially growing, and they can all try to race and catch up with the fictitious honest chain. And a Nakamoto block is a block which none of the none of the trees can ever catch up to that block. Okay, so that's called a Nakamoto block. And our main idea is once you have a Nakamoto block, which means if none of the previous trees can ever catch up to that block in this fictitious system, then this block will remain in the system forever. Okay, so when you see a block, you cannot determine whether it's a Nakamoto block. But theoretically, what we can show is Nakamoto blocks happen every so often. You cannot look at a block, just like we cannot look at you and say that you are not Satoshi Nakamoto. You cannot look at a block and confirm or deny whether it's Nakamoto, but they exist, because Bitcoin exists, Nakamoto exists. In the same way, our proof shows that they exist frequently enough. And that's enough to show that the block tree converges. That's enough to establish both persistence, safety, and liveness. So that's the main idea. Any questions on this idea? This is a key proof technique. I'll not spend more time on this because it's a very detailed idea, but at this level, it should be clear. And this is really why we called the first part of the paper, first title of the paper, which says everything is a race, because there's a kind of a race between the rate at which these trees are growing and the fictitious honest chain. And if you win this race across all the previous trees, then your block will be fixed in the block tree. Yeah, question.
So is the kind of like the the heart of the proof basically that there is a trade-off between how many parallel trees the adversary wants to have with the constraint that they can essentially basically I'm trying to understand what is the trade-off that the proof is. This looks like a convex proof that's saying basically the private attack is the best case. But what is the trade-off if I'm the adversary and I have the choice to, for instance, like grow like 3 trees or 2 trees in parallel to the honest chain? There's a trade-off between how many.
There's a trade-off, right? So exactly. So what happens is actually here in the proof of work case, the adversary is allocating its mining power between these various trees. It cannot reuse the same mining power on all these trees. So actually this picture is a bit misleading. So these trees are not all growing at rate lambda A. In fact, the adversary is forced to make a choice as to which one, maybe it can try to grow this at rate lambda A by 2 and this at rate lambda A by 2, and the others have to grow at rate 0. So adversaries, so that's, I think, the trade-off that you're alluding to, right? Mm-hmm. The adversary is trying to allocate its power across all these trees, and even if it allocates it, so what you have to show is, because it has to allocate its power across all these trees, it will never be able to fully catch up, and lambda A is less than lambda H. It will never be able to catch up with this fictitious honest chain.
Yeah, it seems like the hardest case essentially at least in expectation, should always be that essentially you're growing the tree from the smallest one, really, that's just from the block before you.
Right. So, okay, great question. Great point. So, okay. So the question is it possible for some earlier tree to actually be, to grow longer than the nearby tree, right? Like, so that's the question. So it doesn't seem to make much difference. So it is true that if you have many chains as an adversary, you should really put all the effort on your longest chain that you're holding and then try to grow on that. And it's true at delta equals 0, actually. When you go to delta positive, when there is delays, then there may be something you can do. Or at least we cannot rule out that you cannot do something more intelligent at the moment. So I'll explain why I drew this all as lambda A, which is maybe at that point I'll address this issue also.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But I want to point out that it is not, I mean, while in this view, it seems obvious, but since the honest nodes don't actually form a chain, the honest blocks don't actually form a chain, this race is not a real race. For example, H5 may be connected to H3, H4 may be connected to H2. So in a sense, this is not a real thing happening in the system. So one of the key aspects of our proof and thinking is really tying this fictitious system to the real system. In the real system, these blocks are connected in some more complicated way. And for example, H6 may be connected to T3, right? Like that could happen because there may be an adversary block and the adversary block got into the system and then H6 grew on top of that adversary block. So there's complex interlinking in the real system that I'm kind of not doing here. But it turns out that if this Nakamoto block happens in this fictitious system, then it is guaranteed that that particular block will remain in the blockchain of the original system, not in the fictitious system. So there is a tie in this picture. I agree, it's relatively obvious that, you know, we expect certain things, but in the original system, it's actually more complex. So that's one part. And when delta is non-zero, as you can see, these previous proofs, each of them is a paper, just all they're doing is just improving the analysis of the Bitcoin protocol under partial synchrony. And even after doing many things, they're unable to get to this. I think there is something correct about this view of how to decompose what's happening in the longest chain protocol. So I also want to point out that if you did the same view, right, one may be tempted to believe that maybe Ghost is also secure because of the same heuristic reason that I gave. But the tie between the fictitious system and the real system fails, and so Ghost is not secure. So there is something happening here which is subtle that I'm unable to convey easily. Okay, any other question on that? Okay, let me then skip to a second issue that motivated a whole plethora of protocols, the energy efficiency issue in Bitcoin. And the basic idea behind all of these protocols is, instead of proving you wasted a certain amount of compute, you prove that you have wasted a certain, you own a certain amount of stake. And so a popular family of protocols is called Auroboros. There is Snow White, other protocols. All of them basically follow the same high-level idea. You have a randomness source, and that randomness source somehow, and the amount of stake that you have, decides which are the time slots at which you are eligible to propose a block, and then you propose those blocks. This is the basic structure of this protocol. And these protocols have a whole different analysis from the Bitcoin analysis. So I'm just showing the model here. And the model is that when you mine a block, right, in this model, you can go and attach. So because what has happened is there's a global randomness that decided which slots you're allowed to mine a block. But at those slots, it's your free will to go and attach the block wherever you want. And in fact, you can attach as an adversary that block to many, many different blocks. So this happens in Auroboros and Snow White and on a family of protocols, where you're not only attaching this mined block to the tip, but you're attaching the mined block everywhere to the block tree. Okay, and so this is interesting now, because what happens is the honest arrivals only get attached to the longest chain, but the adversary blocks, in the worst case, can get attached everywhere. Okay, so this is what happens in the Ouroboros family of protocols. And so this is a certain, to some extent, a nothing at stake attack. And again, you can calculate what the security threshold is as a function of the mining rate and delta. And existing papers, including a very recent paper, tried to calculate and improve these thresholds. But what we show is actually, if you look at our view, and maybe as Peter pointed out, really, if you look at this picture, even though I should have really assumed that the adversary is forced to split their power across all these different trees, the analysis, if all is happening is there's a race between what's this chain and each of these chains, then it's possible that even if each of these chain is running at a rate lambda a, the same rate, the adversary does not allocate power. It is actually able to grow all of these trees simultaneously. Even then, you can show that Nakamoto blocks will happen every so often. And that's really the underlying security proof of this Ouroboros family of protocols that we came up with. And so that strengthens the security threshold. Okay, I realize I'm running a bit out of time here, but I'm going to point out what the third family of protocols that we can analyze with this scheme. So one of the problems with this is there is a common randomness that occurred early, and then everybody knows based on that common randomness when they are supposed to make a block. So they know this information. So one of the things people tried to do is they said, we will use verifiable random functions so that only you know when you are allowed to propose a block, but others don't know when you are allowed to propose a block. So this is something that many protocols, Ouroboros Pravos and Genesis and Algorand, they all use this structure. But the problem is, you know ahead of time when you will be able to propose a block. This is unlike in Bitcoin. In Bitcoin, you know when you propose a block only when you propose a block. So this is predictability. So there is an axis of predictability which comes up in the proof of stake protocol, which is not there in the proof of work protocol. And one of the natural idea for how to mimic proof of work using proof of stake is you let each node basically have a different randomness. The randomness comes from the previous block. So instead of when you want to mine a new block, right? When you mine a new block, what you do is so here is the hash equation. You look at the hash of the previous randomness, you look at your public key, and then you look at the time. And if that is less than a certain threshold, then you're allowed to propose a block. So this is an obvious and simple proof of stake protocol. In fact, early proof of stake protocols took this view before, Ouroboros and other things came up. They all took this view and they were deployed in some of the practical blockchain systems. The thing that everybody was worried about is this has a severe nothing at stake attack. Okay, so what is the nothing at stake attack? So you have this proof of stake and then you attach it. Now, if there are multiple chains in the blockchain, an adversary will not only grow on the tip, but also it will grow on multiple different chains. So if you look at what happens with an adversary. So I'm drawing that here. The adversary can not only grow a chain, it can actually grow a highly branching tree, because what it'll do is it'll mine on this block, and maybe it got this block, but it'll keep mining on this block and this block. And so it got this block and this block and so on. So the adversary not only is growing a tree, but is actually not only growing a chain, it's able to grow an entire tree and figure out how fast it can grow that tree. So this boosts the power of the adversary. And if you only consider the private attack, there was a recent paper, an unpublished paper, which showed that if you only consider the private attack, then this protocol is secure as long as beta, the adversary ratio, is less than 1 over 1 plus E, which is like 0.27. It's a very interesting calculation, how fast this tree can grow. And, but the problem is with this protocol, what was unknown is what happens if you consider anything beyond just the private attack. Are there other, because this power is very high of what the adversary can do. So maybe you can do balancing attack, selfish mining and other things and completely outrun or mess up the honest chain. So here is the picture. So we know by this private attack that if your adversary ratio is greater than 1 over 1 plus E, the protocol is not secure. If it's less than that, if only the private attack is there, then the protocol may be secure, but we do not know if the only attack is. In fact, there has been a series of papers, including our own earlier paper, which propose other attacks on these blockchains, including balancing attacks. It's not clear what the threshold at which these attacks can be executed, but our main result is first creating a mathematical model for this particular family of protocols. For example, here, what we're showing is the adversary in the Auroboros model. The adversary is able to grow blocks only by a common mining process, whereas in the other model that I just talked about, which is also used, for example, in Chia's proof of space protocol, the mining is actually independent across the different blocks. So you have many different independent arrivals. For each block, there is a separate Poisson process created and arrivals occurring independently on each block. So it's an extremely powerful adversary model. And our main result is this Nakamoto method actually can analyze this thing, and the main result is, in fact, as long as the adversary ratio is less than 1 over 1 plus E, you will get security. And 1 over 1 plus E is smaller than 1/2. So the obvious question is, can you improve it? And so there was a proposal in the same paper that I just pointed out, which said that if the adversary is boosting its power by mining on many different chains, so maybe the honest node should compensate for it by also mining on many different chains. And so this was a proposal in that paper. Turns out this is extremely vulnerable to balance attacks. And in fact, at least in the extreme case where both the honest node and the adversary nodes all mine on all chains, we can show that there is no convergence. It's an absolutely chaotic system where you will never agree on even what is the first block in the blockchain, even after infinite time has passed. So it's an extraordinarily catastrophic idea. But once you so we have a different version of the protocol we call as C correlation, where instead of updating the randomness at each block, you update the randomness every 2 blocks or every 3 blocks and so on. And we can calculate exactly what the threshold is of security of these protocols. Branching factor reduces as you increase the correlation, and we can show that the threshold will approach to 0.5 as you increase the prediction window. So this is much better than the for example, already in like 10 or 20 blocks, you will get like 0.4 security. Much better than what Auroboros is designed for. Okay, so I'll conclude here by saying that we showed sharp analysis of a proof of a security method that applied to Bitcoin, but also applies to a variety of permissionless protocols, including the common randomness-based proof-of-stake protocols and independent randomness-based proof-of-stake and proof-of-space protocols. And a sharp analysis is really required to propose correct protocols. And as we see, for example, the fight nothing at stake with nothing at stake leads to utter chaos, whereas if you do it correctly, then you get convergence. So I want to highlight that we have a suite of other things, which I'll not talk about here. For example, we can take Bitcoin and actually reduce its latency to something very close to the network latency using an idea called Prism, which appeared in last CCS. And the basic idea is you take apart Bitcoin and reconstruct the different notions of blocks, and you construct a new system which is optimal in both throughput and latency using that method. And it's not something I can talk about. Let me just go to the last claim, which is throughput. All of the systems that I talked about till now required everybody to run everything, right? So everybody needs to run, everybody needs to execute everything, everybody needs to store all the blocks. So it's based on full replication, including Prism. But if you wanted to really achieve very high throughput and not be restricted by the computation bottlenecks at each node, you need to know how to do sharding in permissionless systems. And one general principle of sharding that's used in all permissionless systems is a mechanism by which you allocate nodes to shards. And one general failure mode of this system is if you're allocating nodes to shards, you need to do it in a publicly verifiable manner. So everybody knows which node allocated to which shard. And what that does is the system is prone to bribing attacks, because I know only that these 5 nodes have been allocated to this shard. I can go and bribe those nodes. So we have a new mechanism, which we call free to shard, which has no node to shard allocation. Nodes are free to join and leave whichever shards they want, and still you get the full security. And we show that this system is secure under this entire premise, and we have actually implementations, which is a beautiful game theory thing going on underneath. And we can actually execute transactions at very high rate. Like in our implementations, we're able to hit something like 250,000 transactions per second using such a system. And the main thing I want to conclude the talk is ideas from stochastic processes, information theory, networking, communications, and control actually have very significant role to play in blockchains because of the underlying randomness in these processes. And very little attention has gone in from these dimensions to understand blockchains till now. And we're hoping that that'll change as we go forward. Thank you all for listening to the talk. I'm happy to stay and discuss.
Great, thank you so much. That was going to be my first question, is if you still had time for questions. So
yeah, I do. I'm here. Sorry for going a little overboard here.
That's okay. It happens a lot. We just let people, trickle out if they need to, and the rest of us stick around. So you've got some virtual applause here from our attendees, and I'm going to go ahead and open it up to questions. Just jump right in. If you don't want to be in the recording, by the way, you're welcome to type a question into the chat. I will read it for you. Or if you're okay asking the question, you just don't want your video in, feel free to turn off your video and ask your question. All right, I'm not going to wait too long. So
I'll just add one point here. The latency reduction here comes fully from the consensus protocol. So the basic idea in Prism is instead of running one chain, you run many chains in parallel and sort nodes have a sortation process by which nodes randomly get selected to which chain they're mining on and so on. That's how we reduce the latency significantly. But you're still bound by the peer-to-peer latency. So the peer-to-peer network still takes 10 seconds to broadcast blocks around the world. And the project that we've proposed with Shailesh and is basically to relook at how to design the peer-to-peer layer. We have a recent work with one of my students, Saubik, who is here on the call, and Shailesh, which basically redesigns the peer-to-peer layer to make it more efficient in broadcasting blocks. And that can potentially reduce the latency from what is 20 seconds here to a few, maybe 1 or 2 seconds. So that's the direction that project is heading in.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to end it here. Sometimes folks have questions after the recording is off. Thank you so much for this talk. If you're watching on YouTube, remember to like and subscribe. If you want to suggest a topic or a speaker, there are instructions on how to do that in the description. We'd also love to have you join our mailing list to receive quarterly newsletters, future talk announcements, and information on future research funding opportunities from Protocol Labs. You can do this in the footer at research.protocol.ai. As I mentioned at the beginning, our next talk is Thursday, August 27th from Dr. Shailesh Venkatakrishnan from Ohio State University, who will give a talk on optimal peer-to-peer design for blockchains. And that talk will have a 1 hour later start time at 6 p.m. UTC. Thanks everyone for joining. We'll see you next time.